Meanwhile, on the comic box. Comics. Hey everyone, welcome to the Comic Box, part of the Geek to Geek podcast network. I am Rob, your friendly neighborhood comic book geek, and this week we are talking about Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 2. If we have all done our homework, we have finished reading the last 6 issues of this 12-issue series, and now it is time to close out our discussion of the most important crossover in comic book history, maybe, arguably, and talk about its effect on the comic book industry as a whole and the stories that they tell. But first, the weekly Geekery. So here's what I did this week. A little bit of Black Friday shopping. I picked up a soundbar, little tiny back speakers, so kind of a surround sound thing for my TV. It's the first time I've ever done that. I've always just had whatever the TV was, so I'm still fiddling with it, but if there's any audio geeks out there, I don't know, I might need some help setting that thing up, so maybe we'll talk about that on the subreddit. I can figure it out for the most part, but that's cool. I like that. I'm a big movie geek, so I love being able to up my movie game. The first movie I watched was the Blu-ray of Mad Max. I figured if I'm going to watch something that's big and loud and whatever, that was going to be it, and that was pretty nice. As far as stuff that I'm watching beyond that, I have 1 episode left of Penny Dreadful on the 3rd season. Kind of sad to see it go and see it end, but because I'm me, you guys know this if you've been listening to the show, I am not a fan of super long-running thing. I know comic books, right? But super long-running stories that go on forever and ever and ever. And boy, I guess we'll actually talk why. Crisis on Infinite Earths is why I'm not a fan of stories that go way too long and then need to be cleaned up later on. Just give me the good episodes. I'm okay. Give it short. Give me an 8-episode series. Like, I don't need 23 episodes every single year. Once I am done with that, though, I think I'm going to move back over and finish out Deadwood. I have season 2 and 3 to still watch on Deadwood. And HBO Go there, they also have Westworld, and I have not seen any of it yet. So I might have to go and see what Westworld is all about. I also picked up Legendary. There is a conversation that I was having for quite a while over on the subreddit about this game. It's the Marvel Comics deck building game. I have never played a deck building game, so this is my first. I haven't touched it yet. I am really looking forward to getting a chance to play it. With that, that's pretty much it for this week. So let us crack open the comic box and dive into some news with the Marvel Comics news. The 2 new X-Men teams have been revealed. I previously talked about how after months of what appeared to be no new X-Men books, it was this whole theory of that if Marvel as a whole company, as a Disney, whatever, wasn't retaining the rights for movies for X-Men, then they weren't even going to bother making the comic books, which was awful. And I'm happy to know that we are wrong. We are getting X-Men Gold and X-Men Blue, which is kind of a throwback to the 90s X-Men books. And now we know who's going to be on those teams. The Gold team, led by Kitty Pryde, which is her first time leading the team, good for you, will include Old Man Logan, the old version of Wolverine from the Old Man Logan storyline, who through Secret Wars ended up in our universe, also kind of a thing we'll talk about later on. Storm, Nightcrawler, who may also be a character from another universe. This might also be the alternate Nightcrawler, unless they brought the original one back, because he's died. Colossus, who has died and come back to life. And Rachel Gray, who I believe is an alternate future reality child of Scott Summers and Jean Grey, if I have that right. And I'm mentioning all those things because with Crisis on Infinite Earths, you'll figure it out. But it's important, I feel, for me just to mention that on the side, just the way comics are these days. The Blue team, then, will consist of the original X-Men team from the past who have been around for a while now. So it's the teenage versions of Jean Grey, Cyclops, Beast, Angel, and Iceman. And their mentor will be none other than Magneto. If that seems like a huge deal, it's actually kind of not. He's sort of been on the side of the X-Men for a while. He actually has led both the X-Men and the New Mutants in the past, so that is not as crazy as it sounds. Magneto is basically a big flip-flopper. He would be terrible. Should never run for public office. Or maybe he'd fit in. Marvel TV news. Inhumans. I spoke previously about the Inhumans show that was going to be coming out as opposed to what was originally supposed to be an Inhumans movie. And now we have an air date. September 26th, 2017 is when Inhumans will officially premiere on ABC. And from that point on, it will air every Tuesday night until this 8-episode sort of mini run is over. They're doing it kind of like an Agent Carter thing where it's not picked up as a series that's supposed to run forever. So yay, on my part, yes, give me an 8-episode run. And as we have said before here on this show, the first 80 minutes of that series, so sort of the first 2 episodes, will air in IMAX theaters around the world the 1st of September. And then it looks like it'll be on like normal screens in the theater for 2 weeks after that. So you get the chance, if you want, to go and kind of sort of see an Inhumans movie in the theater, beginning in IMAX. But then eventually, I'm assuming this will be the same thing. It'll be split back up into 2 episodes. And you can start seeing that on your regular television at home starting September 26, 2017. Marvel Quick Hits, little 2 quick things for you from Marvel. There's a teaser trailer out for the Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite video game coming to PS4. I think, does that mean this is the 4th one? Because I believe we've had Marvel vs. Capcom 2 for sure, and I thought there was already a 3, so this might be the 4th one, Infinite. Link is in the show notes if you want to see the trailer. In this trailer, I'm not following this at all, but in the trailer at the very least, they don't reveal the roster at all. The only characters we are shown are Mega Man, Ryu, possibly, I guess, from Street Fighter, the main dude from Street Fighter, and then Iron Man and the Carol Danvers version of Captain Marvel, which I think is pretty cool. But I don't have a PlayStation 4, so I'm probably going to do with it what I did with Injustice and just watch videos of gameplay on YouTube just to kind of see what the game looks like. Or if this is the kind of game that Void is into, then we can have Void on the show and he can talk about his thoughts on Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite when it comes out on PS4. Finally, for Marvel, if you are more of a casual comic fan and you like watching videos that explain things to you, Marvel Comics has been putting out a series called Marvel TLDR, which stands for Too Long Didn't Read. So for Marvel, this is if you don't have time to read, for example, the latest one is the Winter Soldier story arc as it exists in the comics, you can watch this little 3.5-minute video that's got a little bit of animation stuff going on. It doesn't use any actual drawings or any art from the comic book, so it's sort of their own little art style that just very succinctly sums up the Winter Soldier storyline. And then they have one for Thor Ragnarok, they have one for Civil War, and they have one for Planet Hulk as of this recording. I just thought that was kind of neat, little fun videos, and they do a pretty good job of summing up the stories. They obviously have to gloss over stuff, but if you're that kind of person and you just want to sort of catch up on some of these Marvel stories that have been or will be soon turned into Marvel films, that's a place you can go. Link is in the show notes. Help yourself. Go watch videos. Or listen to me, because I will probably go over those storylines for you before the films. Ignore that last story entirely. Strike it from the record. Will I go in and actually delete it from the show? No, that takes too much work. Let's move over to DC, shall we? DC movies. We have an Aquaman release date of October 5th, 2018. I don't think I really have an opinion about an Aquaman film at all, until I see how Aquaman is handled in the Justice League movie. And then I can tell you whether I am excited, because that's October of 2018. So it's going to be nearly 2 years before we see an Aquaman standalone film. But the fact that I am saying the phrase Aquaman standalone film means we must truly be living in a golden age of comic book geeks. Billy D. Williams is returning to what we'll call the role that made him great, because we're comic book fans, so we ignore sports movies and Star Wars. And the role that made him great, Harvey Dent, where he said like 4 lines. He gets to voice Harvey Dent, a.k.a. Two-Face, in the upcoming Lego Batman movie. That's pretty sweet. Indie stuff. Look, I'm a level with you guys. I have never read a single Archie comic. I have read the first volume of the new Sabrina run that's part of Archie Comics, the company, but I have never read a single issue of Archie, or Betty and Veronica, Jughead. None of the Riverdale gang, as they are known, have I read one of their books. So I may not be the best person to say this, but the new Archie TV show called Riverdale that's coming to the CW looks really bad. This is not a show for me. It's obviously not aimed at me, though, because its advertising just says that it's the network that brought you The Vampire Diaries and Gossip Girl. And look, now here's a picture of this dude with his shirt off. Link to the trailer in the show notes. If you're an Archie fan, you have to let me know what you think of this, because this is completely and utterly foreign to me. Poll list. Here's what I got for myself this week. I got the New Talent Showcase and Saga number 40. I've only had a chance to flip through the New Talent Showcase. I haven't read it yet. Looks like there's some interesting stuff in there. Kind of expensive, but again, you're getting a pretty thick book. And I dig it. I like the idea of seeing a bunch of new artists, and hopefully I'm helping support them bringing on more people, because as seems to be the case in the big two, there's not a ton of people. I mean, there's a ton of people always contributing to the books, but you'll always find like 8 books written by the same people and some of the same artists. So it's great to bring new talent on board. As far as stuff I did read this past week, I read Volume 2 of Giant Days via Hoopla. This was the comic I told you guys about last time. I really like it because it has that light read sort of feel, and I think next week issue like 21 comes out, so it's not a super old book, so there's not a ton of volumes for me to catch up on. As far as next week is concerned, I have Green Lanterns 12, Walking Dead 161, Moon Knight number 9, maybe. I don't know. I'm really kind of ready to jump off that book. And Unworthy Thor number 2, which might be the one I'm looking forward to the most. And then I'm also going to start on a webcomic that apparently Greg Rucka has been doing forever and I've never heard of, called Lady Sabre and the Pirates of the Ineffable Aether. It is a like steampunk western something, and it's just a webcomic. They did one trade in physical form via a Kickstarter campaign, but if you want to get a hold of it, it's super expensive, so I'm not going to bother when I can read it for free online. So that's the other thing that I'm going to check out. I'll leave a link to that as well in the show notes. As far as other stuff you guys might be interested in coming out next week, I got 2 for you. First one is the first trade paperback of the new Doctor Strange series. I am not reading it anymore, but I thought it was neat. I thought the first trade was interesting, sort of a new take on the character. It just didn't hook me hard enough, but it's got a lot of weird and that right amount of humor in there, and an art style that really matches both. So if you're a fan of Jason Aaron stuff, if you kind of want to know what Doctor Strange is like right now in the comics, go pick it up, because you can get it in trade form. Otherwise, and this has nothing to do with comics, but I saw this on the list of all the new releases for next week. There is a Pokemon cookbook coming out next week, and while I would love for it to be exactly what it sounds like, I'm sure it's just Pokemon-themed recipes, which is a shame. So somebody please make me a real Pokemon cookbook, and I will laugh heartily and enjoy it. Shall we get into our topic of the week? Let us get into our topic of the week with a bow, 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 topic the week. Crisis on Infinite Earths, Part 2. Pew, 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 pew. When we left. When we last left our intrepid heroes, we were about to get our origin of Pariah and Harbinger, and almost maybe get a sense of what the heck is going on with all of these Earths coming to... Who are these Earths? That is not a good... That wasn't... Almost a sense of what the heck is going on with all these Earths coming together. I will save you the suspense. If you have not read it, that is okay. This was quite a read, quite tough to get through, especially when you don't recognize so many of the characters. So, here's what went down in the last 6 issues. Issues 7 through 12 of Crisis on Infinite Earths. Of the 5 Earths that remained, 3 of them were taken hostage by a group of supervillains who then wanted to take over the other 2 and hold the 3 hostage, while the representatives of all the Earths had gathered on Earth 1 for a big old meeting. But when the Anti-Monitor returns, and remember the Anti-Monitor is the bad guy of our series who continues to get stronger as universes die, so that's why all these worlds are dying off, the heroes and the villains must team up to defeat him. And in order to do so, they have to follow him back to the very beginning of our universe, before time exists, the very first moment that the universe existed before it was split up into the multiverse. A massive battle ensues. The Anti-Monitor kind of dies several times and keeps coming back before finally being defeated. And when the dust finally settles, lots of people are dead, including, and possibly most importantly, Barry Allen, the Silver Age Flash. So for those of you who watch the Flash television show, in the, season 1, where he sees the future newspaper saying that Flash dies in Crisis or whatever at some point in the future, that's what that is, or this, rather, is what that is referencing, is Barry Allen dying. And, well, we'll get to what happens next in a second. In the end, then, we lose Barry Allen, we lose Supergirl as well, of course, in that famous cover of Superman holding Supergirl in his arms and screaming in rage and sadness. And in the end, only one Earth is left, known to comic book geeks and Wikipedia as New Earth. But there are still some loose ends. Any hero or villain who was at the beginning of time when the Anti-Monitor was defeated are now remnants of universes that never existed, but they're still around on Earth 1. But luckily, the Anti-Monitor shows up again in a big storm, and almost every single one of those people conveniently end up dying, so we don't need to deal with, a grown-up Dick Grayson who's Robin from Earth 2 and a grown-up Dick Grayson who's Nightwing on Earth 1 or any of those things. And the only people we have left standing from other universes are the older Earth 2 Superman and Lois Lane, the Earth 3 Alexander Luthor, the son of that Earth's only superhero, Lex Luthor, and a Superboy from an Earth known as Earth Prime. So he's known as Superboy Prime, a character for which we get absolutely no backstory. Absolutely none. He just shows up, which means his story was told in one of the side plots, or we're just supposed to kind of know who he is, and that is all kinds of frustrating. These final remaining characters then enter this sort of limbo/paradise pocket universe thing that Alexander Luthor creates, which leaves us with this all-new, mostly streamlined DC Comics continuity that combines pieces of Earth 1 and Earth 2, and we will now officially refer to comics from this point forward as post-crisis DC, as opposed to pre-crisis that happened before this event. Of course, even though reality has been rewritten, we are still without Supergirl, who will not return, at least as that version of Kara Zor-El, until 2004, and we now have a new Flash at the very end of Crisis on Infinite Earths in the form of former Kid Flash Wally West, who decides to take up the mantle in one of comics' most significant and longest-running passings of the torch. Wally West would remain DC's main Flash for 23 years, until Barry Allen would return in 2008's Final Crisis, which also revealed exactly what happened to the Earth 2 Superman and his buddies so many years ago. It sort of serves as a bookend that brings back a lot of the elements from Crisis on Infinite Earths, but without all of the random characters in disco costumes you don't recognize. So that's the end of Crisis on Infinite Earths. That's how the story ends. New Earth, streamlined continuity, new Flash. But what about the effects? The lasting effects. This miniseries set a precedent for what would become a regular thing in mainstream comic books, the mega crossover event. As time went on, these events became more popular and more frequent, to where now you're likely to see one probably every year or so from the big two, as we call them, DC and Marvel. And when I say these mega crossovers, I'm talking about a main series, which will run, however many issues. Generally speaking, I guess it would be somewhere between 6 and 12. And then like 40 or 400 or however many other side books that tie into it, which clearly happened here, where you had a main book and then all of the individual normal DC comics were showing side stories, heroes and villains reacting to the situations and events caused by Crisis on Infinite Earths. So to get the full story, some of those, like with this whole Superboy Prime thing, were clearly essential reading. Because otherwise you have no idea who he is or who these other people are or what it is they're talking about. This, like I said, it's a trend, but it tends to anger a lot of fans who, as often collectors as well as fans of the material, they want to own a full storyline. You know, you just don't feel like you're getting the full thing, but in order to do so, then you feel like you're forced to buy a ton of other comic books every single month, and we just can't afford that as nerds. And so it's almost this cruel joke once a year that they play on us of trying to get us to buy 50 comic books in order to read one story. Of course, it does well for them. It spikes sales on everything, and with you buying all of the extra books, then comic companies make a lot of money, which is why you get one every year or so. Some other big events, just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, DC has done Infinite Crisis, which was a precursor to the Final Crisis. There was also a storyline called 52 that took place between two of these crises, I guess, books, which was actually its own neat thing, because it came out, 52 weeks, one every single week with a bunch of different stories. But there was Infinite Crisis 52, and of course there was Flashpoint, which served as the second time the DC Universe has hit that reset button, and that is what gave us the New 52, where much of the main comic book continuity was completely wiped away, and Batman and Superman and everybody else has now only been around for like 5 years or something like that. And a lot of stories haven't happened, and they're completely unburdened by all of that continuity. All of those events going all the way back into the 80s to Crisis on Infinite Earths. They can now say, nope, none of those happened. We're starting fresh for all of our new readers out there. On the Marvel side, they did a sequel to Secret Wars that was even bigger, called Secret Wars 2, with a ridiculous amount of tie-ins and events popping up in every single one of their major books. And then there were the Infinity series, like Infinity Gauntlet, which is what the upcoming Infinity War movie will be based on, even though there also was a sequel to Infinity Gauntlet called Infinity War, and then Infinity Crusade. Those seem to me to be the big, massive company-wide crossovers where all of these main Marvel books get involved. But another side effect of Crisis on Infinite Earths are smaller crossovers that just focus on one section of their universe, one property, like just the X-Men books, which then often serve, what has become the main narrative purpose of all of these main crossover events, which obviously to the companies is secondary to the monetary purpose of making money. But in general, the things that we saw in Crisis on Infinite Earths have now become sort of the status quo when you see a big event crossover coming. You can expect that characters, at least one usually major or, secondary, someone who may not be making them as much money, I guess we can do that. They will kill off a character or characters. They will bring back a character or characters. They will have characters pass the torch, like Barry Allen did to Wally West, or like when Dick Grayson became the new Batman. They will hit a mini reset button by making characters young again, or not quite bring a character back from the dead, but do like a thing where Old Man Logan is now the Wolverine in, X-23 is now the Wolverine. See, this is how confusing it all gets. Our Logan in the Marvel universe currently, the Marvel 616 comic book universe, is from an alternate universe, but he's there because if you don't have somebody with 3 claws coming out of his hands on the cover of your Marvel book, what are you doing? The Marvel universe as it exists, sometimes they just kind of slowly update, or they might, do a soft reboot, I think some people call it, where they'll say that instead of Iron Man being around the time of the Vietnam War, it's more like he was in the Middle East when he was injured, and that sort of thing. And then instead of doing the reset button. What they did do more than 10 years ago, and this no longer exists as of the most recent Secret War thing, is they went and created a second completely different line of comics with their characters called the Ultimate Universe. So Ultimate Spider-Man, Ultimate X-Men. And that was so that they could tell stories with those familiar characters without the burden of decades and decades of continuity. Of course, that as an experiment eventually came to the end, and then they did Secret Wars and have kind of been doing this soft reboot of making characters seem younger, and they just don't really suffer the effects of, years and years and years of storyline and of plot. But I feel like that's always been more of Marvel's jam. And also, I guess, because Marvel is much more likely to have 50 books with one character in them, or 50 books around one area, like the X-Men or like Spider-Man or like the Avengers, where over at DC, that's not usually the case. You'll have team books, and Batman might be popping up in a number of books, but outside of that, you have Batman and Superman, and they're pretty much the only people who ever have more than one series to themselves. But let's not veer from our main point. What have we learned? What have we learned through this wonderful 2-week excursion into 1980s DC Comics? Mostly that mega crossovers are a mess. They are a mess of tangential side plots that lessen your main story as a whole and generally don't really survive well on their own. This was not an easy read. I will not say that this, holds up after 30 years, 35 years, 30 years, 30 years, math, 30 years. But they make good money for the companies. They get people reading new comics that they may not have otherwise even looked at on the shelf, and they help companies try to clean up their continuity in order to keep us geeks happy. Because let's face it, you guys, as geeks, we are a pretty fickle bunch. But it is important to say that even if we don't really like mega crossovers, there are some important purposes they serve, if only to draw attention to major changes that the companies want to do. If they want to get rid of Barry Allen and introduce Wally West as the new Flash, they could do it in the pages of Flash, but if they really want to draw attention to it, you do the big crossover events. It's the reason things like the death of Superman, which happened across, the death and return of Superman, which happened across a wide variety of superhero comics, got national media attention. That is why they want to do these, is it brings in new readers, it makes them lots of money, and then they get to make a big hoopla about big changes that happen within the comics industry and in comics continuity or comics, the overall giant plot, whatever. What's the good way of saying that? Their universe, their storied universe, the big changes that happen there as a whole. And as a side note, before we close this out, you heard me say the Marvel 616 universe earlier, and I refer to this a lot. When I talk about the main Marvel comics, they are known as the 616 universe. Well, Crisis on Infinite Earths and pre-Crisis DC is where that comes from. There is a mega list now of fictional universes. Earth 1, New Earth. Marvel is 616. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is considered Earth 199999. And so on. You can find this list online on Wikipedia on various sites, where every single time we have an alternate reality, every single time we have an alternate or possible future, different comic companies, somebody out there is assigning each one of these a numeric value. I don't know who it is. I didn't look incredibly hard to find out. I did some poking around online, and I couldn't figure out exactly where all of these numbers come from. But the idea is, in our own headcanon, in order for stories like Marvel vs. DC, Batman Hulk, or Superman Spider-Man crossover books, for those to exist at all, for those stories to exist, for those characters to ever meet, it must mean that these Earths are actually parallel to one another and must somehow have some sort of connection. Therefore, we assign a numeric value to all of them in the hopes that at some point these characters will meet. It is absolutely ridiculous, but I kind of love it because it just shows how much nerds care about the things they're passionate about. They care about the nerddom. And that's our topic of the week, you guys. So we're going to go bop, bow, bop, doo, dot, dibba, da, bop, ba, da, bop, doo, dot, dot, doo, down, dop, doo, bow, and that's it for this week, you guys. If you think I missed something important about Crisis on Infinite Earths, which, let's be honest, I probably did. Or if you just like to dig a little deeper into this topic or talk about any of the other big crossover events, head over right now to our Geek to Geek podcast network subreddit at reddit.com/r/geektogeekcast. That's geek20 geek, not the number 2, geek2 spelled 2-0, Geek to Geek cast. And you can connect with me, with the other hosts of the Geek to Geek podcast shows, with all of your fellow geeks, everybody who listens to any of our shows. We're all there. Well, not all, I suppose. There's a pretty large number of people who listen to the shows. There's a number of us there. You can come join us and we can talk about these things. I would love to hear from you. Speaking of, you can sign up for updates on all of our Geek to Geek podcast network shows over at geektogeekcast.net. If you would like to get a hold of me personally, I'm on Twitter. You can find me at Rob's Comic Box or personally at Nobi. Links in the show notes. It would be great if you could leave me a star rating or a review wherever it is you are listening to the show. It only takes a couple of seconds and it really does help out both me and the show, and it helps grow our community and give us more people to talk to on Twitter and on Reddit, which is fun. So, until next time. This is Rob, your friendly neighborhood comic geek, closing the comic box. I am going to be taking a bit of a break here for the holidays, but I will be back on your feeds in January, if not sooner. So until then, hit me up on Twitter, visit us on the subreddit, have a wonderful holiday season, and I will see you guys next time. The comic box hosted by... That's really hard to do. Me. Talking about Crisis on Infinite Earths. Crisis on Infinite Earths. You know, that'd be fun. Maybe I should do that. I'll write a spoof song. Christmas songs of comics. Somebody's got to have done that somewhere. Find me a song where somebody rewrote a Christmas song or any holiday song, winter song, with lyrics referring to superheroes and not Jingle Bells, Batman Smells, because, come on now, we can do better than that. Find me one of those, send it to me, and I got nothing. Mention you in the next podcast? We'll figure out something. We'll do something. All right. Bye, guys.